How's it sound in the back, Very? Okay. All right. Second to last class. I think next Friday is the last class. Okay. And I'm making no promises of how far we're going to get or not. But I wanted to continue, and hopefully by the next class, we will have covered all the afflictions, the klesha, the pano. And the reason they're important, one, is that this whole section of 10 questions posed by Manjushri Bodhisattva is asking basically, why is it that people, living beings, even when they encounter the teachings, and perhaps even a good teacher, still are unable to see through and put down the phanna, the klesha, the afflictions, what's going on there. And basically these are mental, emotional, and could be physical distress, agitation that obstruct the attainment or realization of awakening, of bodhi. And they aren't just big, there's a list. There's an actual list of the afflictions, and we've been going through them somewhat systematically. So far we've covered the, what do you call the 6 fundamental, correct? Okay, I'm not even going to ask if anybody remembers what they are. I'm just going to say we covered them, and they're somewhere in the deep layers of your consciousness, and they'll come back at some other time. But we went through them. What we're going to now is a continual list called the 20 auxiliary afflictions. And these are called anuklesha. And they are broken down into 10 minor, 8 major, and 2 intermediate. And so in the next 2 lectures, hopefully we'll get more into this. But I want to just continue with the list here. So the first of these 10 minor is krodha in Sanskrit, which means wrath, more along the lines of fury, rage, indignation. And the difference, say, between pratiga and fury, which is krodha, is, and remember this was one of the fundamental anger, right? We had that listed. So the difference between this one and anger is really just, this is an escalation. This is an escalation. And this anger is more along the lines of vindictive or hostile attitude in one's heart, mind. But the fury is an increase in anger when, and this is what happens, a chance for harming is at hand. And in a very agitated state of mind, it actually leads to physical violence. So it's an escalation of anger. These follow. The next one is called upanaya, which translates as enmity or hatred, resentment. And this is a kind of holding on to anger, a lingering holding on to anger. And it is actually harboring and clinging to, almost like nurturing an intention to cause harm, and very interesting, to withhold forgiveness. So it has 2 sides of it. It wants to cause harm, but it doesn't want to yield to forgiveness, either to forgive oneself or to forgive others. So when the opportunity to forgive comes up, it resists this. It buries it and just clings to the intention to cause harm. The third of the minor is called mraksha, which basically translates as hypocrisy or covering. I like covering better because it's literally concealment, or sometimes it's called slyness concealment. And this is defined as concealing or covering up one's faults, or uncommendable, they say uncommendable actions. Basically, you blew it and you don't want anybody to know about it, and you want to cover it up. And it could be for yourself, but it also could be for your group. So it's not just you. It could be that your group has overstepped and did something pretty bad, and therefore you want to spin it. Now, of course, none of these apply to the modern world. These are very ancient, but I want to throw them out there now in case you might think, oh, there's some case studies going on right now. This sometimes also is called hypocrisy. It's basically speaking one way and acting another. And it's associated with then dissimulation. So this is number what, 4? 1, 2, 3. 4 is in Sanskrit pradasha or pradasa, and it means contention. And you know that Master Wah created 6 principles for his disciples: no greed, no fighting, seeking selfishness, self-benefit, and deception. And this one has to do with the fighting, the contention. But it's more than just fighting. It's actually motivated by spite or spitefulness. What spite means? How to spite? It's a lovely English Anglo-Saxon word, spite. Looking down, yeah, you could say that's true. How do we put that? Anybody else on spite? How's that? Harmful, right. But it's a simmering resentment. It is also related to anger, but it's preceded by a kind of a fury and indignation. And its function is to become then the basis for harsh and strong words. So when you insult people, when you put them down, this is done out of spite. And the effect it has on oneself is that it decreases your sense of merit, your sense of being a good human being. And very interesting, it doesn't allow you to feel happy. So it's almost like with spite, there's no space for happiness because you're constantly angry and looking for the faults and taking down others. So there's no room for joy. It's a rather, I would say, a rather joyless existence. The next one is Eurystia, which translates as jealousy or envy. And this is very interesting because it's defined as it's a state of mind or heart in which one is highly agitated to obtain wealth and honor for oneself, but unable to bear the excellence of others. Isn't that a beautiful definition? Well, Confucius had an expression, he says, everybody wants to be honored, but nobody really wants to do what's honorable. And so this idea has, but you notice in all of these, there's a self and an other dimension to these afflictions. So it's not just something you feel yourself. You are enabled to bear somebody else's success. So you can't even enjoy your own because you're constantly comparing and contrasting. Someone just beat me at it. Someone's better at this. And so you don't get the joy of being the best person you could be because you're looking outside to compete. Yeah, these are very, very subtle. The next one, I don't know how many I will do tonight. Let's see, wrath, enmity, hypocrisy, contention. Wow, jealousy. Maybe I will go into one more. This one is called matsirya, and it means parsimony or stinginess. And again, it's defined as you're incapable of enjoying your own possessions and material objects. You're clinging to them, unwilling to part with them, but you can't enjoy them while you have them because you're so afraid that you're going to lose them or they're going to be taken away or they don't come up to what your expectations are. So instead of getting joy out of what you get, it actually causes a kind of anxiety and tension, a sort of gnawing incompleteness. And this is it's the stinginess part of it. But it also means you're unwilling to part with them or share them with others. And sometimes the joy of having them comes with sharing them with others. Ironically, by giving them sort of away, there's a deeper appreciation for them in yourself. It's a collective enjoyment, so to speak. But it's also an over-concern with material things in general. So this stinginess is really talking about not spiritual stinginess necessarily, but it can manifest as spiritual stinginess as well, an unwillingness to share the Dharma, an unwillingness to teach, even though you're fully capable of doing that. It also stems from an over-clinging or identity with wealth and honor. and it belongs to the passion of lust. Lust is at the root of this. I think a good English word for this is miserliness. Miserliness. And basically, it's just an unwillingness to share or use something we possess. But then it leads, very interestingly, to a kind of stealing. Now, I don't say this, I'm not making this up, but there's an aspect of stealing in the Avatamsaka that basically says it's not you take what doesn't belong to you, but you take more than what's coming to you or you need. So this stinginess can mean hoarding. You start to hoard and you overpossess, and then you have too much where others have too little. But again, because of the stinginess and the miserliness, you don't want to share, you don't want to give it up, even though you can see there's a huge need to share. And this becomes almost like an obsession, almost like a habit like gambling. You cannot. The thought of letting go, the thought of sharing becomes almost like you go through DTs, delirium tremens at the thought of giving something up. Of course, the good one of this is those of you, somebody sent me a thing today on the Star Wars, wishing me a happy day, and then said it had Yoda with a birthday cake, and said, "The Force be with you." And I'm going, I have no idea. Who's Yoda? What's the Force? And then I looked up online, and that was the time I was in the monastery. It was 1977, and I had no idea that this thing came out. And like I really feel out of it. Everybody seems to know about Star Wars and Yoda. But in any event, where was I going with this? So the one I did kind of catch, because I read it, was the Trilogy of the Rings, the Tolkien trilogy. And there, any idea of miserly or parsimony or stinginess in there? Wow. Mine, oh, mine. The ring, right? Gollum with the ring. Yeah, so that is a personification or a kind of an allegorical portrayal of what stinginess looks like. And it actually misshapes your body and your face. It actually has an effect on your physiognomy. These afflictions, you feel them in your heart, you feel them in your body, others feel them too, but it also changes your physiognomy. You become pinched up and tight. And if you're looking to compete in jealous and envy, then you have these sharp eyes that are always calculating. So if you're watching someone like this, their eyes are always going like radar, checking out, am I getting ahead, am I getting behind, but there's not this just open-hearted, glad, almost childlike innocence. It's all calculation. Maybe I'll stop there. I'll just mention the other ones, and we'll finish up some more on next week. The next one is trickery or flattery. And then the other one following that is deceit or pretense. In case you're not here next week and you don't get them, I'm going to get a little idea in advance. The second to last one is arrogance, conceit. And then finally, vihimsa, which is the opposite of ahimsa, which means cruelty and harming. Not just harming, but actual premeditative, destructive cruelty. So we will come back to this, and I'll go a little bit into tonight why these are important, because one, they're obviously important because the text is highlighting these. But they're more important in the sense that, and I'll go into this a little bit, in our training and study under Master Hua, I would say almost all, or a majority of the time and the teaching and instructions were around these, were around the klesha, the afflictions. And it's very interesting. That's where he attended. And he basically said, when these are taken care of, Buddhahood accomplishes itself. But you cannot not take care of these. And these are very human. They're very accessible. They're not mysterious. They're not in the realm of esoteric whatnot. This is just about the art of being a really good person. And when you look at these, basically, these are the things that, to some extent, explain why the world is in such bad shape. And when they're corrected, why there's hope. and why there's possibility. So it's on these very basic human psychological, emotional elements that everything turns. Now, why we're coming back to this in the text is that here, virtue leader, I believe it's virtue leader, is that who's responding? I have to remind myself here. Dharma leader, right? Dharma leader. And we're going to pick up tonight on page 23 in my text, which would be 23, I hope in your text as well. Top, a deaf musician, that passage. Okay, and then please, out loud, with a good voice, so it's not just my voice, chopping through the Chinese. We're going to read, let's read the first two verses together in the Chinese. Those of you who don't know Chinese, you don't have to know it. You can pretend you know it by just following the pinyin on the left-hand side. And it's pretty much like it looks, like RU is Ru. It's different than Ru in Winnie the Pooh, because I think that's ROO, right? Yeah, thank you. Those who read Winnie the Pooh. You should read Winnie the Pooh if you haven't read it. It's a very Buddhist text. Pooh, right? Pooh gets in trouble. He climbs this tree and he comes down, boom, boom, with the thorns and the bees and everything bother him. He says, oh, bother. It all comes from liking honey too much. Dukkha, suffering, the cause is greed. Anyhow, if nothing else, it'd be better than reading the news. Read Pooh. Anyhow, here we go. 如龙昼烟月，月迷不此文，于法不修行，多闻亦如是。Next, 如盲会中伤，是彼不似见，于法不修行，多闻亦如是。So the text goes on here, continuing using metaphors or analogies to explain the one basic concept here is why some people cannot address and alleviate their afflictions is because there's too much learning and not enough practice. This is basically what it comes down to. And although learning is really important, when it becomes overemphasized or a replacement for actual lived practice, it becomes an obstruction, whereas it should be an aid. So he gives these examples. He says, as a deaf musician delights others with what he cannot hear, so does one who practices the Dharma, not practice the Dharma, but only amasses much learning. Master Wao, when he was teaching this, I'll read some of his passage tonight, but he was saying, don't get too literal with these metaphors and analogies because they're basically just hypothetical situations. And I'll read his commentaries. Maybe deaf could or could not make music compositions, but the key is he would not know himself because he's deaf. So music, he says, in this metaphor represents the Buddha Dharma. The deaf person knows that music in general is a fine thing, but does not know whether the music he himself makes sounds good or not. This person represents someone who knows that the Buddha Dharma is fine, but as to whether he cultivates well or not, whether or not he cultivates at all, basically he ought to know for himself. However, in this case, he merely advertises Buddha Dharma, announcing how good it is in this way and good in that way. He talks about all its good points with the Buddha Dharma, but does not really know himself ultimately whether it's good or not, because he does not cultivate. So I want to get into this. What is the cultivate? The xiaoxing, if you look at the Chinese characters here, it's the last two lines, bu, not, xiu, xing, literally correct, repair one step, one's life. It's very concrete, it's very straightforward. And the duo one means, duo is many, much, and one is study, is the same way. So these are the two phrases that we pay attention to in these verses, not cultivate and too much learning as either a substitute or a mask, because sometimes learning can be put up as a shield to keep the heart from opening up. It protects, it defends against insight, it defends against even mutual criticism. So he goes on, he says, and the next one is someone blind paints pictures, cannot see what he depicts for others. So is one who does not practice the Dharma, but only amasses much learning. Then he goes on. This is a very interesting one. As a pilot, as a master pilot of a ship, still ends up dying in the sea. So is one who does not practice the Dharma, but only amasses much learning. I don't know, there's a number of ways you can read this. There's a question, remember the first one, someone in water dies of thirst. They don't drown, which is sort of like, you would think they're in the water, but they don't drown. They die of thirst even though in the water. Now you have someone who's a ship, captain, a master, and dies in the sea. Could be at sea, but in the sea. So how does one die if it's a master pilot? Anybody? What would be the, Shipwreck. Yes. But in this verse, you have to find attribution and agency with the person, with the pilot, and not the conditions, right? Because this is introducing an external effect, which is the shipwreck. So it has to do something with a flaw or lack of something in the ship pilot, him or herself. Now, you could have storm or swept overboard, but that would only apply if there was hubris on the part of the captain, and he overestimated his ability and said, I can steer through this storm. The one I'm thinking of course, anybody? A famous American story. Moby Dick. Everybody, who's read Moby Dick here? Okay, you can watch the movie. Moby Dick, Captain Ahab, is obsessed with killing this white whale that has caused him to lose one of his legs. And so he's got a wooden peg on one leg and he's walking along. It's a very, Herman Melville is the author. We're looking at about 1830, 1840, I would guess. This is written. It's considered to be the greatest of all American novels. And it never loses its urgency or presentness of somebody who's obsessed with something and just basically takes the ship and the whole crew on this mad journey to get this whale, disregarding everything else, only at the end to go down with his ship and the whole crew, and everybody except one dies, and this one is the one who tells the tale of what happened. But it's basically obsessed with power over nature, obsessed with some goal, and ignoring everything else. So even though he's a good pilot and he knows how to do it, this greed, this obsession to get vindictive, whatever, overcomes him, and he goes basically mad and takes down. So this is a little extreme, but the idea you take away from this is that even a massive amount of navigational skill and knowledge doesn't necessarily ensure that you're going to safely go to sea and return. And it's not just because of the vicissitudes of nature that is a cause, but there's something flawed in overestimating your knowledge somehow. The example that Master Hua gives very interesting in this passage is the example of Ananda. You all familiar with Ananda? Some are familiar with Ananda. Ananda was the disciple who, when the Buddha said, I'm dying and I'm not going to live any longer, started to panic and said, well, who will be our teacher when you're gone? He started a series of questions and went to the Buddha to ask him these questions. But he was also a cousin of the Buddha, and he became a monk because he was really impressed with the Buddha. I'm just going to follow him and be like him. And so Master Hua's example for this passage here, he says, Ananda was foremost in learning of all the disciples of the Buddha. In lifetime after lifetime, Ananda had applied himself to acquiring erudition. His power of recall was especially strong and long-lasting. Unlike us, what were the 6 pages? Oh, that was last week. I have no idea. Okay, he was foremost in acquiring erudition. His power of recall was especially strong and long-lasting. Therefore, after hearing the Buddha speak the sutras only once, he could remember them. And that's why Ananda's the one who, when they assemble in the first assembly after the Buddha's passing, Ananda recites, he says, "This I have heard, Roshir Wo 1." And he becomes the narrator of basically the recording device of the teachings of the Buddha that are then codified into a formal collection of teachings. At that time, and they remained in an oral tradition for 300 plus years, but it begins with an oral recitation on the part of Ananda of what he heard. So among all the disciples, he had the most retention capabilities. And so he could remember them almost in their entirety from beginning to end. But, and here we go, but, because he didn't know how to cultivate, he got in deep doo-doo. So I'm not gonna share what happened to him, but basically he got waylaid, almost lost his spiritual life. The Buddha had to send Manjushri out to rescue him because he was out on alms round, and he really tied himself up in a knot. And he comes back and he's really, how should I say, almost mortified that he was so embarrassed that he did not have control over his mind and his basic emotions. He knew all this stuff, he had all this, but his mind and his basic emotions were terra incognita for him. So this is something I've also noticed with friends of mine or people that are really heady and scholarly. Sometimes they cannot grasp the basic human emotional stuff that's going on. I've seen this again and again because they're in a world of abstractions and ideas, and they literally don't read the room. They don't read the ambient emotional, social situation around them. And also, they don't read their own emotions and feelings. They think these are intrusions into pure thought and therefore can be dismissed, but they don't go away. And this is how the knots start to form on an over-intellectual approach. Anyhow, in what? Could it be arrogance? Very much so, I would say. I would much say the overestimation is another way of looking at arrogance, overestimating. And so with conceit, the next one coming up that I mentioned, conceit and arrogance have to do with an overestimation. But what's interesting psychologically, they often come from an underappreciation. So arrogance and this bravado often mask insecurity and feelings of inadequacy. So it's a compensation for, and that's why it's a klesha, it's irrational. It's very hard to get at because it's actually protecting you from any kind of sense of I'm not perfect or whatnot. I don't feel perfect. And so you put up the arrogance and conceit. And so it's actually an overcompensation for a feeling of inadequacy. And that's why, now your question was, could this be arrogance, the overly, yeah. But what I'm saying, it is definitely can be arrogance. It manifests as arrogance, a puffery, I'm something. But if you pick at that a little more, you'll find often it's an overcompensation for insecurity. So it's very tricky to get at. It doesn't produce the confidence that one thinks it will. There's always a kind of fear of being embarrassed or showing up. And so then it leads to this, how should I say it, the jealousy and envy part of it stems off of this. You can see how these all start to knit together into a huge knot, which is what Huineng says, these are the knots, and that's another name for them. They're called the knots. We knot ourselves up in these things. Anyway, we go on. Let's do the other one. We'll do the Chinese again. And this is the last one. And why we're doing the Chinese is partly for me because my teacher many years ago told me to finish a writing project the bowing journals, and to quickly learn Chinese. So that was like 50 years ago, and I'm still struggling with it. So this is my attempt to pretend that I'm learning Chinese, right? So someone who stands at crossroads, here we go. 无在此求道，光说众好事，内自无事得，不行亦如是. As someone who stands at a crossroads, vastly proclaims a host of good deeds, but possesses no true virtue himself, so is one who does not practice. This is pretty straightforward and obvious, but basically it's, there's a wonderful expression. I don't know if the Chinese, so you had to correct my Chinese here, because I can remember my teacher saying this. It comes from the Taoist tradition as well, but it says, true words are not fine sounding words are not true. Those who speak eloquently often do not know, and those who do not know often stutter. This kind of expression, the true words, the true heart, is not just gifted eloquence or even true. So the expression is, you can speak wonderfully, you can speak well, but if you don't cultivate it, it's not the way. This is the verse. Now, the way I understand it in Chinese, but correct me, it's 说得好，说得妙，没有虚心，没有道. Something like that. Excuse my tones. But I can remember my teacher getting us on that and telling us more important is to speak true and not to speak fine words. But this brings it back to then the last line here, you see all of them they're ending with amassing learning, amassing learning, amassing learning. And this last verse ends with, so is someone who does not practice. So now we come back to a closing line that seemingly moves away, but I think maybe I could suggest it kind of hits the nail on the head of what is this thing called shoshing practice. And I'm going to suggest that this thing of practice is nothing more than recognizing and getting rid of klesha, these bad habits and these faults, these obstructions. And these are very human, they're very accessible, even if we cover them over and we pretend they're not there, they gnaw, they come out at us. It is what causes us to have a friction with other people, have psychological distress, and actually have an imbalanced approach and understanding of our connection to nature, to the natural world. It radiates through all three dimensions, psychological, social, and natural. And so what I was saying when we were studying with the master was really clearly about facing, recognizing these afflictions and basically turning them back into bodhi. He probably worked almost exclusively on this and training under him. He did proclaim vastly, as someone at the proclaim, and that's the shuen of his name, to proclaim. But more importantly, he transformed, and that's the hua. So the shuen and the hua, proclaiming and transforming. Partly, I think, in that he hints that he couldn't do that for us, even though he might have wanted to completely untie our knots and completely liberate us and have us catapult into awakening. He could only point out, he could only encourage. And he did that by scolding, by joking, by hundreds of thousands of expedient means. But no one could do that for you. That was the tough part of this cultivation. That was something you had to do yourself, even though he could point to it, bring it out. It also occurred to me that the four vows of the Bodhisattva, you all know the four vows of the Bodhisattva, right? Living beings are limitless, endless. I vow to liberate or free them all. The afflictions, the klesha, are limitless. I vow to, they say, eradicate them, but change them all. The Dharma doors are limitless. I vow to study, learn them all, and the Buddha way is unsurpassed. I vow to reach it. If you look at that, basically, it's just another restatement of the Four Noble Truths. So the living beings are the confused, suffering state of oneself and others. This is dukkha. The afflictions are the cause of dukkha. And then you notice the first fundamental of the basic afflictions were trishna, which is desire, and avidya, ignorance. Those two are the major afflictions that cause the afflictions that cause the suffering. The last one is the attainment of the way. And then the third one, studying, is cultivating the way. So you have suffering, the cause of suffering, the elimination of suffering by cultivating the way, basically nirvana. And then you have the vows of the bodhisattva, living beings, but it's not just me as a living being, it's all living beings, is in the scope or reach of my concern. And the afflictions are not just my own, but those of all living beings. It's sort of like I'm going to help alleviate suffering. The only way to do that is to get free, to attain the way, and that you do by studying the Dharma. So you can see that these line up pretty much with the Four Truths. But central to this is the living beings. Wanted to share with you often when that's recited, it's seen as living beings are other people than myself. Okay, it sort of seems like this compassionate, caring outreach, altruism, if you will. Oh, poor living beings are suffering and whatnot. But in the non-dual teaching of Buddhism, then others and self are along a continuum of interrelatedness. It's not one or the other, it's both. And that's why Master Hua would say, only by changing yourself can you change others. Only through changing others can you change yourself. They are happening simultaneously in non-dual. The best text, I think, on this is actually the Platform Sutra, and I'll just read you this passage tonight. Because when they come to Huineng to take refuge, they do these vows. Living beings are boundless, and he stops them at that moment. He says, what living beings are boundless? You're about to save them all. And they're thinking, well, others, it's certainly not me. You know? And he goes, and here's the passage he relates. He said, good and wise friends, the living beings are within your own mind and heart. They're the deluded thoughts, deceitful thoughts, untrue thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, jealous thoughts, malicious thoughts, klesha. He's going right to klesha. All the mental states like these are living beings, and each must be liberated within your own nature. This is true liberation. Then he goes further, and I'm saying this is what practice is. What is meant by liberating yourself through your essential nature? It means liberating the living beings, sentient beings of your wrong views, of your afflictions. He nails it right down here. And delusions within your own mind by means of right views. Once you have right views, you use the wisdom of prajna to lay bare and untangle your mistaken, confused, deluded living beings. You yourself liberate each and every one. When falseness occurs, liberate it with truth. When confusion arises, liberate it with awakening. When delusion sets in, liberate it with wisdom. And when evil takes hold, liberate it with goodness. This liberation is true liberation. So I just come back to when it says practice. Practice is very accessible. It's very practical. It's just crossing over, literally, but to cross over first comes recognition. Okay, so I thought of a story tonight that you've heard before, and I'm going to tell it again. One, because I know somebody brought some desserts tonight, and I was supposed to stop on time. Locke told me I should stop on time so we can have desserts. Right, Locke? Okay. This is affliction-free dessert. And the story I'm going to tell you heard before, but it's a really good one about Master Hua cultivating with him working on the direct afflictions of every individual and skillfully working with it. So this one involves, there were two monks who did a vow in pilgrimage of 3 steps, 1 vow from San Francisco to Seattle. And then there were two monks who did it from Los Angeles to Ukiah. So basically, they covered the West Coast in the process of the early years. Now, the first group had a monk who, his name is Heng Ju, and Heng Ju was really talented with fixing things, preparing things. He had a very quick wit, very sharp mind. He didn't like formal study. but he liked to do things hand-on. And he really took to heart getting rid of greed, anger, and stupidity. And he found the most one that he had trouble getting rid of was greed. And it wasn't, he left home, so he gave up greed for material things, cars, money, wealth, motorcycles, which he was into, all these things he could give up. He gave up sex as a monastic, celibate monastic, wasn't interested in fame, and really didn't sleep a lot. He'd sleep sitting up, 5 or 6 hours a night. But there was one thing he couldn't, and that was greed. But what was it greedy for? It was for food, for particular, and only for desserts. So regular food, he could just eat it, like it was just nothing. But desserts he really had, and he realized the more he cultivated and got rid of the other things, the more desserts started to grip on him. Like he would be in meditation and oh, desserts. He'd go, oh, mani padme pie, oh, mani padme cake. He was like, so we had a retreat, we were doing a Chan retreat, and he was really wrestling with this, and his favorite, of course, was pies, berry pies. And so we're doing the retreat, and he's going, okay, I can do this. I made this vow. I'm going to cut off this greed. It's just greed for one is greed for all. And then the pie would come up, and he says, okay, just this one time, I'm going to give in, and that'll quiet it. But how he's going to give in? We're at the Goma Monastery. There's no berry pies there. Well, it turns out there was a bakery around the corner on 16th Street. And so during the break, everybody's walking. We'd sit for an hour, we walked for 15, 20 minutes, sit for an hour. And during that break, he looked and he slipped out the door of the monastery and went around the corner. And they had little pies then, you could get these little pies, mini pies. And so they were like a bargain, 6 for, I don't know, then whatever, $1, $2 or something. And so I don't know where he got the money anyhow, but he bought 6 pies and then he was gonna eat them on the way back. And so he's coming back on Valencia Street, and 1 pie goes down, 2 pies go down, and he's trying to walk it, and he said, I got to make it back for the sit. The 3rd pie goes down, and he's at the front door. And so he's got 3 pies left over, and he can't really eat them, and what he's going to do. So in those days, we used to have the high chain, the robe with the, and if you've never seen these robes, you see them in the movies, they look like long butterfly wings. They're hollow inside. So he took the pies and dropped them down into there, and then walked it in, did the emulation, sat in meditation. Now you can imagine sitting in meditation with the pies in your robe, and the smell. Other people, what is that? Oh, I must be false thinking it couldn't be pies because we don't have pies here. And so, there was no time to eat them because the schedule was we meditated from basically 2:33 in the morning till 12 midnight. That was the old Chan sit. So there's walk, sit, walk, sit, walk, sit. So finally at midnight, we do the rest. He goes up to his room, and we're resting, and he thinks, what am I going to do? I will go up on the roof and eat them. Nobody will see me up there. So he listens to make sure everybody's asleep. He goes into the bathroom on the 2nd floor. Now, Hangju used to be a Navy SEAL, so he's really skillful at sneaking up and doing all these things. And those windows had those old ropes on them, with weights. So if you had, so he just samadhi-like lifted that up, didn't make a single sound, right? It's going up and up, and finally he can slip out into the fire escape, and he goes up onto the roof, and he starts on the roof, oh my God, the pie, oh, and he's eating the pie. He says, oh, damn, I promised I wouldn't, and I'm being deceptive here, and blah, 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 but I don't. And he's eating pie, and suddenly he hears something on the fire escape, and he looks over, and somebody's coming up the fire escape. He's going, who is that? And then he sees the shaven head rise above the fire escape, and he realizes, oh, it's the master, it's the abbot. Oh my God, what am I gonna do? And he still at that point said I could chuck the pies over the side, but I'm gonna eat them really fast. So he started to shove the pies in, and he walked this way. And then Master Hua walked that way to confront him. And then he would turn around and walk this way, Master Hua. So they did this little dance on top of the roof for quite a while, and finally they came face to face. And there he was, the juice dripping down his cheeks onto his robe, blushed and red, and expecting to get scolded and so forth. And all Master Hua said to him, he just looked at him, smiled, and says, how does it feel? And he just turned and walked away. And the reason I tell this story tonight was that Master Hua didn't scold, he didn't condemn him, he didn't embarrass him. He asked him, how does it feel? How do you feel about what you're doing with the emotions you're feeling now, the deception you're feeling now, and so forth? That he turned him back to his own agency, to his own heart, as saying, and if you pay attention to that, you will certainly get out of this. But if you're paying attention to whether you're going to get one by a me or not, you're still much learning, but you're still not practicing. So I tell the story tonight because you've heard it before, but it's a really beautiful example of what it means to really practice. I don't know, I do know something. At the end of his pilgrimage, we had a dinner, and to celebrate the completion of the pilgrimage, and we're eating the dinner, and Master Hua says to somebody, and they go out to the kitchen, they come with a big berry pie and give to him. I don't know what Master Hua said to him at that point, but it was how humor can be used to teach and transform. Anyhow, we'll stop there tonight. Locke told me to stop on time because there's going to be a little get-together in the kitchen.
Yes, but there's a question online about why the kleshas are called minor. See, because
what?
it's the kleshas. You said the minor klesha.
Yeah.
The person's asking why is it minor? Seems pretty significant.
I didn't make up the list. I think it's a good question. It's not a bad question. My answer would be these are listed in terms of their karmic gravity. And you can see the ones I just went through, for example, the first three, enmity and whatnot, are rooted in derivative off of anger. So the root of this is anger, then these derive off of that. So that's one way of looking at them. But my other answer would be whatever one you have or has you. Oliver Sacks did a wonderful thing. He says, I don't say people have cancer, I say cancer has them. The disease has them, they don't have the disease. But whichever one has you or you have, that one is the most basic, the most fundamental, and the most important one. So if it's jealousy and it's not the other ones, it is absolutely the focus of your attention. That's the one you have to pay attention to. There's a tendency we had to think, oh, if I can find other people's afflictions and faults, I'm really doing a good job. And so we became really good at, oh, yours is greed, yours is anger, you're always jealous and whatnot. That in itself is a major affliction. And that's the one I'm basically calling fault finding. Wonderful, but good question. Okay. We will do the transference in English. And I don't know if there's berry pie tonight. And there will be a test next week, written and face-to-face. May every living being, our minds one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the triple jewel.